Can everybody hear me? Can everybody see me? Oops, something went wrong. Try reloading the page. Is what the chat box is telling me. If anybody has put anything in the chat, I can't see it right now. Hopefully we can get that fixed. So I am here today to give an update on the cult news. I haven't done this for 4 or 5 weeks, so there's a lot to get through, and I thought the easiest way to do that would be to go live for 30 minutes to an hour or so to just run through everything and get through all of it in one go, and then be at a good place to carry on having regular cult news updates. So there's been so much happening in the world of the Cult Vault podcast that it's been really tricky to try and keep on top of the cult news. So without further ado, I am going to get into it. Juco's here, says that people can hear me loud and clear, which is great. So I am going to turn off this background, which puts me on the full screen. And I am hoping that I can share. Oh, actually, first of all, I want to get rid of this caption because we are live right now. And I'm going to share, hopefully, my entire screen. And this should, hopefully, this will work. No, that's not working. Right, let's try this. So, hopefully, now I can't see the actual screen. Is it come up or is it a blank screen? It looks really funky when you do it one at a time. Okay, let's do it one at a time. So, okay, this is a bit better. So we were covering the Danny Masterson case, as many of you who have been keeping up with the case or may have heard, or who have seen the videos that have come out on the Cult Vault podcast. Danny Masterson was originally tried on 3 counts of forcible rape. The jury were deadlocked and there was a retrial. That recent retrial came back with 2 guilty verdicts and 1 verdict that was still hung by the jury. And it has recently been released that there will be no 3rd trial to retry that 3rd charge of forcible rape against Danny Masterson. So he's facing up to 30 years in prison for these 2 guilty verdicts of forcible rape, and he will be sentenced on September the 7th. So when we have any news of that, I will be sure to bring you an update on the Danny Masterson sentencing. So now I think I'm going to have to do tab at a time, which is frustrating. On the subject of Scientology, recently the Los Angeles Police Department closed the case of Shelly Miscavige as a missing person. In 2013, after Leah Remini left the church and began speaking publicly about Scientology, she filed a missing persons report with the Los Angeles Police Department, who assured Leah Remini that they had actually tracked Shelly Miscavige down, conducted a welfare check, said she was fine, gathered fingerprints from Shelly Miscavige, and left the missing persons case open, but were supposedly able to confirm her whereabouts and her well-being. It's just come out in the last few weeks or so that those prints taken in 2013 don't actually match the original prints on record for Shelly Miscavige. More collusion, perhaps between Scientology and the Los Angeles Police Department, I'm not sure, but as of this month, the LAPD have officially closed Shelly Miscavige's missing persons case. So if I go straight onto this tab, it doesn't. Okay, maybe I can just. Does this work? Maybe this works? I don't think that works either, does it? No. Okay, I'll just have to do them one by one. Sorry about this. So we're now up to this news story talking about the Laurie Daybell case. The last time I talked about this, Laurie Daybell had been found guilty by a jury after a lengthy criminal court case on multiple counts: conspiracy to commit the murder of JJ Vallow, conspiracy to commit the murder of Tylee Ryan, her two children, and guilty of the murder of her two children as well. So after the court case was all wrapped up, the jury were then allowed to speak publicly about their experiences and to speak to the press if they wanted to. One of the jury members who appeared on Nate Eaton's East Idaho News segment talked about his experiences within the trial, what he thought of Laurie Daybell, what he thought of the case, how he knew she was guilty, and some of the other things you might want to ask a jury member after a a a, a murder court case hearing. So after the interview went live, there were accusations by Laurie Daybell's defense team that there was information given by this juror pertaining to the death of Charles Vallow, Laurie Daybell's previous husband, who died of gunshot wounds after Laurie's brother supposedly defended himself against Charles Vallow. After the guilty verdicts came in, it was announced that Laurie Daybell will be expected to be transported to Arizona soon to stand trial on charges of the conspiracy to and murder of Charles Vallow. Now that it is no longer being treated as a manslaughter or self-defense charge. So the juror spoke out. The defense team said that none of the information around Charles Vallow's death was mentioned in the court case, in the court hearing, which means that this juror must have accessed media and news stories during the trial, which is not allowed, and therefore had created a biased jury member. And this means that Laurie Daybell couldn't have possibly had a fair trial. And the judge said, no, that's not going to fly here, and there won't be another trial for Laurie Daybell on the grounds that the jury were biased. The interview took place a couple of days after the trial had ended, which gave enough time for jury members to go and look at other things outside of this case that they weren't allowed to hear about during the court trial. It's something I would probably want to do. So that is not going to be happening, and sentencing is due to take place on July 31st, which is not too far away from here, where there will be victim impact statements read aloud at the court at the sentencing hearing. So I imagine that that will be incredibly difficult for the family and friends that have been impacted by the murders of Tammy Daybell, JJ Vallow and Tylee Ryan, as well as other multiple deaths surrounding this case, which haven't been explicitly tied to Laurie Daybell yet. The death of Charles Vallow, the death of her brother Alex Cox, the death of her former husband. There's so many things that are happening in this case. If you're aware, the reason I'm talking about this, if you're not aware of the Laurie Vallow Daybell case and the Chad Daybell case, is because they were labeled the cult mom and doomsday dad. It's a really convoluted and messy story, but sentencing will take place soon, and we will give some updates on that when we have them. So next we are going to be talking early release of Nexium member Alison Mack. Alison Mack was sentenced in 2021 to 3 years in prison for her involvement in bringing women into Keith Raniere's DOS program, and for being involved in the abuse and harm of women that were incredibly vulnerable and horrifically abused by Keith Raniere and others who were closest to him. She served 2 out of the 3 years and is now out. Has talked about feeling remorse and feeling guilt, and sends her apologies to those that have been harmed by Keith Raniere and her own actions. And I have seen other former Nexium members talk about their hopes for Alison Mack's own recovery from this entire ordeal, and I think that shows great strength from the survivors of Nexium. Hi, Paul. Good to see you. Thanks for dropping in. Just going through all of the very quick news stories today. So the next one we're going to be talking about is an ongoing case right now in London. Kevin Spacey is on trial for 12 offences that took place between 2001 and 2013. And these are 12 offences against 4 different men between those years. The court has been in session, or I suppose that the trial has been active since June 28th, and it is taking place in London. And today, news has come out that Kevin Spacey has been described by people in the courtroom as a bully, and that a big sexual bully, and that he used his position, his power, and his money to take advantage of people and sexually assault people. So he is on trial for sexual abuse, sexual harassment, and sexual misconduct, which is just quite prevalent to note there if I didn't mention that at the start. And then the next interesting thing to talk about, messages that have been made public about Jonah Hill and his ex-girlfriend or ex-partner, Sarah Brady. So I don't know how everyone feels about this, but there's a lot of talk going about coercive control and how these text messages might fall into the remit of manipulating, exploiting, or unduly influencing an individual. So Jonah Hill, a high-profile Hollywood actor, has had a lot of private conversations with his partner leaked online, where there is language used around Jonah Hill explicitly talking about what clothes his girlfriend should wear, what posts she should take down from social media, who she can hang around with, who she can't hang around with, and if these are the boundaries, he calls them, that she doesn't want to stick to, then they can't have a romantic relationship. Um, but some of the things that worried me in terms of controlling a person in these texts was when Jonah Hill said something about your therapist thinks I'm a bad guy. I'm literally the best boyfriend in the world. And I listened to a panel at the International Cultic Studies Association conference a few weeks ago that talked about sneaky spiders. And one of the things a person might say to you is, you'll never find somebody better than me. I'm the best you've got. Um, if you leave me, you'll have nothing. And this type of language. And this is really what these text messages reminded me of. Um, so I just thought it would be interesting to bring that up and to talk about that in the cult news today, as I talked about Kevin Spacey and other things going on in the so-called cultiverse. So that's those two things. And now we're going to be looking at interesting news coming out of South Australia. So South Australian government have been talking for a couple of years about their commitment to criminalize coercive control. And if you go on the Australian government website, there are, as much as you can see on the Crown Prosecution Service website, there's a breakdown of exactly what coercive control is, what the hallmarks of coercive control are, the definitions for different tactics that are used within coercive control. And it's very similar to the CPS website in breaking it all down and informing anybody that visits that page what coercive control really is. So there's all different things here around um, reproductive coercion, as Ashlyn Hilliard has specialized in with her master's in coercive control research. All sorts of different information coming out around escalating coercive behavior, persistent harassment, stalking, and really how to spot the signs of coercive control. And this is in motion. So there is some really good news coming out of South Australia, and it looks like soon we will have some government laws in place around coercive control being a criminalized offence in South Australia. So the more we see this in different parts of the world, the more we can expect other countries to follow suit, which is really important, really powerful stuff. So this next news article is one that is continuous, ongoing. It's the situation that's unfolding out in Kenya regarding the Shakahola forest and the starvation cult, as it's being called. So most recent numbers, just for a bit of context in case anybody hasn't heard of this case, in Kenya a number of months ago, a few people were found starving and at the point of almost being dead in the Shakahola forest. They were rushed to hospital where they received urgent medical care, and then law enforcement were told that there was possibly more victims out in the Shakahola forest in shallow graves. At first, police expected there to be around 50 to 100 victims involved. Since then, the number has gone up to 372, with more mass graves being found. It's a really intricate and difficult thing to unfold because it seems as though this is an underground criminal network that is very effective in finding vulnerable individuals and convincing them that in order to reach heaven, in order to have spiritual experiences and speak to God, they have to starve themselves. So Good News International Ministries, led by Paul Mackenzie or Paul Nthenge, was the first group of individuals to be found in shallow graves in Shakahola Forest. The really strange thing about these first 100 or so bodies that were found in shallow graves is that a lot of their organs were missing, which speaks to possible human trafficking for organ harvesting purposes. Since that news came out, all of the talks about missing organs has really died down, but the death toll is increasing. So I don't know if there is some type of government information control taking place or people trying to minimize public knowledge of ongoing investigations into an underground criminal network. But having so many bodies and starting off by recognizing that there were organs missing speaks to a high profile criminal organization that Paul Mackenzie was a small part of. So far, in terms of this case, 100 people have been rescued from various households where they have been starving themselves. Some looked to have been imprisoned. 40 people have been arrested in connection to coercing people into making these decisions, and 700 people have expressed concerns for missing family members and loved ones. So there is a chance that the number will continue to rise until it reaches almost 1,000 people. What the government is doing to rectify this, to inform the public, to not just talk about extremist beliefs, but to address the cultural, societal, influential things in place that will have caused this to have happened and for these people to have been exploited in such a horrific way. I'm not sure. A lot of people are just talking about the need for religious not religious protections, but laws against certain religious practices to be put into place, which maybe is not a bad conversation to be having. Another thing that's come out recently on to cult news is a former Manson family member, Leslie Van Houten, has finally been released from a California prison. So Leslie Van Houten is a former member of the Charles Manson family. She was sentenced to death in 1971 for her role in the Leno and Rosemary LaBianca murders. And in 1971, she was 19 years old and was originally given the death penalty. However, that was then commuted to life in prison, and many thought that she would never be released. Many other Manson family members have died in prison. And now she is at the age of 73, out on parole, where she is expected to be on parole for 3 years. And who knows what happens after that. But she spent 52 years of her life in incarceration after the events of the La Bianca murders took place. Horrific, horrific crimes. And there's been a mixed bag, a mixed reception on what people think and feel about the release of Leslie Van Houten. But again, just shows how many more conversations we could be having around the subject of controlling individuals. Another thing that happened recently in Cultiverse was that the leader and founder of One Taste, the orgasm cult, known for the orgasm meditation practices, some former members have given telling interviews on the Cult Vault podcast, handed herself in to law enforcement a few weeks ago and has declared that she is not guilty on any of the counts that she is facing. that involve human trafficking for labor purposes, manipulation here, accused of abusing members, targeted individuals who had previously suffered sexual trauma. In 2002, the Netflix documentary One Taste was released, that came with much backlash for using material of members of One Taste without the members' consent. So all sorts of ethical issues with this entire thing. But Nicole Daydone has been released on a $1 million bail, and we await information on the upcoming charges against or trial of Nicole Daydone for labor trafficking charges. And talking about upcoming charges, the case with the Dances with Wolves actor Nathan Chasing Horse is facing further sexual assault allegations and charges in Canada. So I covered a little bit of the Nathan Chasing Horse case previously, but this was in regards to allegations and charges brought to Nathan Chasing Horse in Las Vegas. So he is in a Las Vegas jail awaiting trial for 18 felonies, which include sexual abuse of children and human trafficking. There were accusations of Chasing Horse running a cult of women in a home where he was spiritually married to a number of women and had told them to bear arms and take up arms against anybody that came to break them up, and also marrying himself to children allegedly, and also encouraging women to take their own lives if they were to be approached by law enforcement at their home. So there are now 9 more counts against Chasing Horse, which have been brought to him in Canada, in Alberta. 3 counts of sexual exploitation and 4 counts of sexual assault. So I will keep everybody posted on the developments with that case, and we will see where that takes us in the future. Now, some stuff about fictional things happening in the world that are influenced. There has been the recent season 6 of Black Mirror landing on Netflix. And it was brought to my attention that episode 3 of season 6 takes a lot of influence from the Manson family. So Beyond the Sea apparently depicts a cult where one person comes home and finds cultists in his home. I haven't seen the episode. I'm not sure what influences are used within the episode or how accurate those influences are. Maybe it's just an aesthetic. Maybe it's just some dialogue. I'll have to go back and have a look and let people know. But another thing that's come out that people are talking about in regards to cult depictions in media is The Idol, which is a new HBO series. And interestingly, HBO are making a lot of cult documentaries at the moment. So here we have Abel, also The Weeknd, who is now going by his name Abel, is one of the main characters in The Idol and has been contrasted or compared to a cult leader. Again, this is something I haven't seen. I don't have HBO over here in the UK, but this is co-created by the person that was involved with Euphoria, which has also had some interesting connections to the topic of cults and coercive control. So if anyone's seen that, let me know what you think. A big thank you to one of the listeners who came to me with a story about the 12 tribes coming out of Europe. So there is a case of missing people at the moment, and it links to the 12 tribes. Also, there are allegations against the 12 tribes in Europe uh, that there is human trafficking taking place. I need to look into this a bit more and corroborate some of this information before I speak too much about it. But in this news article, it states that German police are looking for a missing girl and her parents. They went on a hike, and the tracks led to a sect of the 12 tribes. Unfortunately, nobody has located the family yet, but people have said that they have witnessed them in the area. Who knows what will happen, if the family will be found, if the family have joined the 12 tribes, if the family were walking past and were caught up in something. I'm not sure at all. But the 12 tribes are suspected of the crime of kidnapping a minor. This could bring some huge European attention onto the cult, so-called cult, and hopefully we'll find out what's going on with that case soon. Interestingly, there's some stuff coming out about the the Sullivanians at the moment. There is a film being made which I think will feature Mark Ruffalo and Michelle Pfeiffer potentially. But this New Yorker news article spoke recently about the Upper West Side cult that hid in plain sight. So my thoughts went straight to the Odyssey Study Group, and somebody emailed me recently to tell me that they had recently left or had left the Odyssey Study Group and had recently started to unpack their experiences, and brought to my attention that there were more cults hiding in plain sight, of course, in New York at that time, and still. It wasn't just the Sullivanians, as is depicted here in this New Yorker article. It was also Sharon Gans and Alex Horn's Odyssey Study Group. And talking of the Odyssey Study Group, this New York Post article that features a friend of the Cult Vault podcast, Spencer Schneider. Spencer is being sued by the Odyssey Study Group for his recent memoir, A Manhattan Cult Story. It has been put to the New York Post that OSG and its members turned the other cheek for a decade in the face of Schneider's defamation and harassment, the Odyssey Study Group said in the filing. But last year, Schneider dramatically and inexcusably upped the ante. They were left with no choice but to file the lawsuit to put an end to Schneider's relentless chicanery, the group said in court papers. So anybody that's not aware of the Odyssey Study Group, it was an esoteric hidden school that operated out of New York and also Boston, but started in a different part of America before all of that, and has ties to different states. Spencer talks about in his Manhattan Cult Story memoir about all sorts of awful things that take place around human trafficking, forced labor, um, forced marriages, fight clubs, and just losing over 2 decades of his life to the Odyssey Study Group. So interesting to see what comes of that. I reached out to Spencer. He said that he's fine with the case. Interestingly, I maybe it's a clutching at straws thing for the group to try and get people to stop talking about horrible things that have happened. But who knows? That's my speculation. Sue's here. Hi, Sue. We've got Simon. I want to say that's Saman, but I don't want to. I'm sorry if that's wrong. Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. We're just going through the cult news. So we. Oh, do you know what? I've just realised that I never changed. Here we go. Let me just change it to this. So here's Spencer. Here's the New York Post article about Spencer and his book. There's Manhattan Cult Story. If you read the inside of the book, you'll find some published words by me. and here's the article just explaining. Spencer is also currently has a federal human trafficking lawsuit against the group pending in Brooklyn federal court. So we'll wait to see which charges, which allegations play out, and hope for the best on that one. Another recent news article that was brought to my attention is the news of Diamond Ranch Academy finally shutting down. This feels like this has been one of the longest ongoing ordeals for troubled teen industry survivors. The school were not going to close down. They shut down for a little while when there was an investigation, and then they were allowed to reopen. This is a picture of Taylor Goodrich. Taylor Goodrich, she went to the Diamond Ranch Academy and never came home. She died inside Diamond Ranch Academy from sepsis after complaining for days and days and days that she was in excruciating pain, and she was left on her mattress on the floor of her room, being told that she was being overdramatic and overreacting, and she had a distended stomach, and she never ever got to go home. Her family and her father specifically have spoken out about the devastation of losing a child that you thought was being sent to a place where they would be safe, where they were going to get help for emotional, behavioral, educational needs. So Paris Hilton, who is also a survivor of a troubled teen industry program. Provo Canyon is notoriously one of the most abusive programs that has been spoken about by survivors, of which Paris Hilton is one of, says, "I am shaking. I am so excited to share that Diamond Ranch Academy is closing. The state held this facility accountable, and I am so happy they can no longer abuse kids. To all the survivors who worked to make this a reality, congratulations. I'm so proud of you." So originally there was a back and forth. The ranch is going to stay open, it's going to close, it's going to stay open, and people kept getting their hopes up. But then when the academy had to renew its license, it's my understanding that that license was denied and they were not allowed to renew that license, and therefore no longer able to stay open. So this is another huge win for survivors of the troubled teen industry, and we hope that it just continues to make waves and get more facilities closed down. Let's hope the New York Post stand by Spencer. I do believe that they will. I know that Spencer has had talks with the New York Times, and is also a lawyer, and understands all of the tactics and things that are being used. Verity says, "I'm listening, Casey. Do you know why the Masterson sentencing has been moved back? I feel appalled at the craziness going on." It does feel like that when you pack it all into something like this, and these things are all happening around the world, and you really bring a focus to all of them. It does feel quite overwhelming, and it does feel like there's no goodness left in the world sometimes. But there's some great people here in the chat today, so that really does help. The Masterson sentencing, I'm not sure specifically why it's been moved back. Maybe it has something to do with the defense team the Danny Masterson original defense team leaking documents to Scientology's attorneys, but I'm not 100% sure. I will find out and I will get back to you unless somebody in the chat knows. I know one or two other people that are tuning in today do follow this stuff as well. Something that came out on the Telegraph today, something taking place in Spain. So this might interest you, Sue. Shamanic cult leaders arrested for sexual abuse of members. Around 100 vulnerable young people recruited by the Soul family were allegedly abused during drug-fueled sessions of group psychotherapy. So this has feelings of Synanon. This has feelings of the Sullivanians. This has feelings of some troubled teen industry programs, which makes sense if you put that and Synanon in the same sentence. Police in Spain have arrested 3 people accused of running a shamanic sect that recruited vulnerable young people, some of whom were later abused sexually during drug-fueled sessions of supposed group psychotherapy. So some people are paying more than 10,000 euros to become members, subjected to psychological control techniques. That's in kind of inverted commas, air quotes. I don't really know what psychological control techniques means, unless they're going to break them down for us. But it's interesting that this is some of the most recent cult news that you can find today. The sect preyed on young people from the Castellon area and Catalonia, always seeking out individuals usually aged around 20 who had serious emotional issues or problems in their lives. Some members allegedly joined the sect while under the age of legal responsibility, which in Spain is 18 years old. So that's another case that we will have to keep an eye on. The 3 people arrested are being investigated by a criminal court on suspicion of a series of offences, including sexual abuse, forming an illegal organisation, and crimes against public health. So it's Spain. I don't talk about Spain very often in these cult news updates, but interestingly, there is one today. Talk about, which some of you may have already heard about, is the case of Michael Protzman. One of the kind of, if QAnon had several different sects or branches or chapters, Michael Protzman was one of the leaders of one of those chapters. 60 years old, and he recently died in a dirt bike crash. Michael Protzman, a few months ago, had convinced some people that JFK and JFK Jr. were not dead, that they were going to be making a grand appearance in the road in Dallas, Texas, that JFK was shot on, the main street, and that it was going to be a parade, and that it would be JFK who would be responsible for bringing in some of this justice that QAnon individuals talk about with regards to the ending of the deep state. So that's the last time I'm going to say that Q word. I'll just say Q. So Michael Protzman dies at the age of 60 in a motocross accident. And some of his followers don't believe that he's actually dead. Some of his followers believe that when the time is right, Michael Protzman will come back and he will announce the reasons for his fake death, much like JFK did. It's a really difficult thing when this happens because it's like Protzman has followed in the footsteps of JFK, who they were admiring, who they were waiting for to return, and now that he's the leader of this chapter, it's as if that narrative has now fallen onto the leader himself, who has in fact died. So we will keep an eye on the Q stuff and see what comes of that. There is all this stuff with the Queen of Canada still still unfolding, and just cue stuff all the time. So that's that. A huge for victims of Gloriavale today. Gloriavale is a cloistered compound, religious compound, a fundamental Christian compound in New Zealand. And recently, 6 women won a lawsuit where they claimed that they were used as slaves, labor trafficked, where they were not paid for any of their work. And the judge said that the the women were essentially trained to enjoy work from a very young age. They would work willingly and bear any hardship that came with it without complaint. It was good to Judge Inglis accepted that the women were told it was good to suffer, it was good to put your flesh down, and it was good to be tough. You were taught not to complain, you were taught that you needed to be happy in denying yourself. The work was unrelenting, grinding, hard, and physically and psychologically demanding, the judge noted. I have reached the conclusion that the plaintiffs did their work because that is what they were told to do, with what each of them had been trained to accept from birth, and the consequences of not doing what was expected, namely falling out of unity, were dire and well known. Exclusion from the community, from all that was familiar, from family and friends, and into a world they know little about, were ill equipped to navigate and had been taught to fear. Wow. What huge validation to come from a judge in a court case like this. So this is a huge win for everybody that has ever been harmed by Gloriavale and those that continue to be harmed by Gloriavale, despite Gloriavale leadership releasing some type of article or statement a few years back saying that they would work on how they do things and that they won't harm people anymore. I read something somewhere that mentioned everybody in New Zealand would be celebrating with these 6 women today. And I think that that shows just how prevalent this cult is, so-called cult, in this part of the world. Interestingly, looking at another article from Stuff that has come out recently and talking about some I was given by a um a listener of the show. So Shincheonji are attempting to expand. I talked former cult news episode about Shincheonji expanding into the Pacific Islands and how they are attempting to do that with recruiting individuals from Pacifica communities, and going on to college campuses and targeting young and vulnerable people, as we hear far too often. What I have heard now from somebody that is in fact a pastor is that Shincheonji members, under some type of false name, the Unity Church of Love or something along those lines, they are approaching pastors and they are saying, "Do you want to join our fellowship? All you have to do is sign this paper." And Pastor David asked more questions. Which church are you from? Which group are you from? And the evasion in the questions really led David from listening to the Cult Vault podcast to ask, "Are you Shincheonji?" And eventually, the people admitted that they are actually from the Church of Shincheonji and are trying to create a network of churches and pastors. This to me feels like a power play. The idea of building a fellowship is a really beautiful thing, but the information control and the nefarious tactics that Shincheonji are infamous for at this point are still in play when trying to potentially exploit people's churches and congregations and infiltrate them in such a in such an awful way. So just the biggest kudos to Pastor David for being able to spot that ruse and for politely declining, but being so open and loving and exchanging a dialogue with these individuals in the hopes that they might see the difficulties with Shincheonji. I recently released an episode talking with Bateman and Daniel Schricker about Quasi Ubuntu and the CRL Rights Commission, who were conducting an investigation into Quasi Ubuntu and allegations of abuse made against them. The report took 2.5 years to be released, and it was only recently released in the last week or so because of legal action taking place against them, much with Erica's involvement, and Daniel's support and comments and information as well. What came out from that report was heartbreaking, gut-wrenching. I couldn't even use the word disappointing because it's not enough. The CRL Rights Commission, they did a media conference. It was about an hour to an hour and a half long. They talked about their findings. They talked about how Quasi Ubuntu have been practicing within the parameters of religious freedom, and that the most that the survivors of Quasi Ubuntu can expect is an apology. Quasi Ubuntu, they bottle and sell Aquele water, and every spokesperson from the commission had a bottle of Aquele water on the table in front of them, and they were drinking from these bottles. And when one journalist asked them, "You're drinking Aquele water," they just seemed to laugh. This is more than a smack in the face for every single person that has ever shared their story about the horrors that take place within the walls of that compound and over in Europe. So hopefully there will be more legal action. There will be strength in numbers from survivors, and this is not the end of the fight. But Erica Borman called this a toothless watchdog. And anybody else that was looking to potentially contact this commission to investigate other abusive places, you just why would you bother now? After seeing this, why would you bother? So it's such a dark time for everybody that's shared their stories around this. So that was Ubuntu. I hope I have some more positive news about this one soon. Another celebrity who is now speaking out their experiences in a cultic environment is Bethany Joy Lenz, who was in One Tree Hill. She is now speaking publicly about a cult that she was in for 10 years of her life, although the cult remains unnamed at this point. She is writing about her experiences, and we can expect to see a publication of some type soon where she details some of the experiences that she had. It's more of a spotlight on cults, it's more of a spotlight on coercive control. So I look forward to picking up a copy of whatever is published and learning more about this abusive church that Lenz has spoken about in this BuzzFeed article. It says Mosaic Church here, but at the top it says unnamed cult. So there we have it. Now, the last thing I wanted to update everybody on before I finish today is the case of so-called Mormon prophet Samuel Bateman. And has been in the news a lot in terms of abuse allegations against him. Oh gosh, I don't even know where to begin. If you're not up to speed with this case, Samuel Bateman broke away from the FLDS church, started his own kind of abusive sect. He has 51 felony counts against him at the moment, and he is currently incarcerated, although that is not stopping him from making explicit phone calls with children. He had 11 forced plural marriages and married children as young as 9 years old. He is facing charges of trafficking children across state lines, kidnapping, so not just human trafficking, but not just transport, but sex trafficking as well. Um, there was also a case where Samuel Bateman had some of his older wives hide children from law enforcement, hide children from their parents who had fled to safety, and just all manner of horrific things. So more charges are being brought against Samuel Bateman, and the children are in protective custody. I hope that there is the right type of support for the children and the women forced into plural marriages. Just such a horrifically sad story, and so many of these individuals that break away from fundamentalist Mormonism or just the LDS Church claim themselves to be holy prophets, and continue the cycle of abuse. So the more of a focus on this stuff coming out of this part of America, the better. Um, even if it's a deterrent to some people who think they can twist and bend the laws because this feels like a lawless part of America that is a Mormon state. So we'll have to see where that goes next. And then Ajuko says, I heard a new documentary about a therapy cult is being prepared about the Educo cult that is in Ireland, America, Belize, UK, Australia, and South Africa. Yeah, I have heard that actually. I'll see if I can get the article up. I read something on Dialogue Island. See if I can get that up quickly before I finish today. Um, oh, actually, I bet by the time I found it, it's just going to be you. You're going to have put the link in, or someone's going to have put the link in. Um, so I'll just quickly find this before we finish today. If anybody has any other cult news that they'd like to add before we finish up, then do let me know. Here it is. So, do 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 do. Dialogue Island has said documentary maker would like to speak to you. I am a reputable, experienced documentary filmmaker with a background covering complex, sensitive topics for all the major television platforms and broadcasters. I am currently researching Tony Quinn and Educo, and I would really value speaking to people who have direct experience of this person and or organization, whether that be in Ireland, the UK, or further afield. So much has been written about Tony Quinn and Educo over the years in the news and online, but I would like to go behind the headlines and hear about your own individual experiences or an experience of a family member or friend. So it says here how you can contact this person. You have it on good authority that they are a trustworthy source and that this is a credible project. So anybody that has any information about Educo, please do consider getting involved with this project. I'll put the link in the chat, and I'll also put the link in the episode description. The rest of the links are all up in the episode description already. And if anybody wants to add any news stories in, I'm always looking for more information about ongoing things in the world. It's really hard to do continuous updates of all of these things. So I'm thinking that what I might do is switch to doing like a weekly stream where I uh, talk about various different cult news things and then just upload that video to YouTube, I think might be the easiest way to do that. I don't know what everybody else thinks, if that would be a good way to do it. So, yes, I think that's everything. Thank you for joining us today, and do let me know if you have please do let me know if you have any other cult news stories. Thank you to everybody that has contributed news stories. I've been getting things all day, and I do have Google Alerts set up, so I have around 50 to 60 emails, 50 to 60 news articles sent to me every single day. And it's really hard to work out what is prevalent to talk about, and what is something that we can talk about later on. And as you can see, when I don't have a script, I'm very kind of so I apologize for that as well, and for not really knowing how best this software works. It's very tricky when you're trying to share your screen. I have to do it one at a time, and I'll have to work out a better way to do that. So I will do that for next time. Thank you, everybody, for joining me, for saying hi in the chat, for tuning in. I appreciate every single one of you. Have a great rest of your weekend, and I will speak to you soon. My name is Casey, host